But Rick Ross, we at you, boy. Yeah, we out here in Cali, man. We ain't playing with you. You done started something you can't finish. You ain't bigger than the mob. We are the mob.
Drive-by shooting on Las Olas. A gunman, police say, aiming at rapper Rick Ross. The 911 calls just released.
Oh my God, they're turning around and coming back. Okay, I'm hanging up.
Callers hiding. Rick Ross trying to get away, ramming his Rolls Royce into a nearby apartment building.
Do you have any update on the shooting, man?
He doesn't answer anything.
William Leonard Roberts II, better known as Rick Ross, really needs no introduction. His name and status speak volumes. He's a renowned American rap artist and record label owner who's made a huge impact on the music scene. Ross has dropped several successful studio albums and is the mastermind behind the famous Maybach Music Group, which he founded along with other big names like Whale, Meek Mill, and French Montana. Ross has been immersed in street music since he was a kid growing up in a rough area north of Miami. He even dropped out of college to chase his dream of becoming a famous rapper, but along the way, he got tangled up in the drug dealing business, which was just part of the culture he grew up in. But even with that gritty background, Ross wasn't quite ready for what was coming his way. He was about to comfort one of the darkest sides of hip-hop, gangs. We all know how brutal these gangs can be, and if you're not careful, things can go south real quick. One of the most infamous feuds in the rap world has been between Rick Ross and the Chicago-based Gangster Disciples. They didn't just make threats, they posted death threats against him on YouTube, and at one point, a hit squad even opened fire on Ross in South Florida. So what exactly did Rick Ross do to get on their bad side? Let's dive in and find out.
Pulling up on you, we pressing up on you, the whole Maybach. Music. Don't matter who in music. Everybody on your label is in trouble. GD4!
First off, let's talk about Atlanta, Georgia. Today, it's one of the fastest growing, most glamorous and popular cities in America. If you've ever been there, you know it's a vibrant place with new apartments and condos popping up everywhere. But Atlanta wasn't always this way. Back in the 1980s, the city had a terrible reputation. Violence, extreme poverty, and general dysfunction were rampant. It was seen as just another struggling southern city like New Orleans, Memphis, or Baton Rouge. But things started to change in the 90s. Major companies like UPS, Chick-fil-A, and Home Depot moved to the area, creating thousands of jobs. This drew people to Atlanta from all over the country, including cities like Los Angeles, Detroit, New York, and most importantly, Chicago. However, because Atlanta itself had such a bad rep, many families settled in the surrounding suburbs instead. They sold their small homes in places like Compton or Chicago and bought big two-story houses in the Atlanta metro area. This was a huge improvement for many families, but it wasn't perfect for everyone. While the environment got better, some of the young men brought their old mentalities with them. For instance, if you were part of the Rolling 60s gang in LA, you remained a Rolling 60 in the Atlanta suburbs. Instead of claiming a specific territory, gang membership spread throughout the metro area. The Rolling 60s are just one example. This happened with many gangs across America. You name a gang and they probably moved to Atlanta during the 90s and 2000s. In this story, we're focusing on one of the largest and most dangerous gangs in the country, the Gangster Disciples, also known as the GDs.
GD4! 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 Disciples! Disciples!
Here to pull your head about your head, nigga. I got all my D, got in my bed, nigga.
The Gangster Disciples were founded by David Barksdale and Larry Hoover in Chicago in 1968. They structured their organization to resemble the Italian Mafia, copying its hierarchy and operations. The GDs are led by a national leader called the Chairman, who oversees everything across America and makes major decisions. But as the gang expanded, one person couldn't manage everything, so they introduced regional leaders. Each region has its own leader known as the governor, who oversees his state and makes decisions for local members. The governor is supported by two key figures: the treasurer, who handles the gang's finances, collecting debts from local members and forwarding the money to the national leaders, and the chief enforcer, who maintains order and ensures members follow the gang's codes. The chief enforcer has significant power. If a member steps out of line, the chief enforcer can put a green light on them, especially marking them for punishment or worse. This authority makes the chief enforcer someone you definitely don't want to cross. So, to sum it up, the chief enforcer is the guy you really don't want to piss off in the Gangster Disciples. Now that you're familiar with how the GDs are structured, let me introduce you to the governor for the state of Georgia. When the GDs made their move to Georgia, they picked a highly reputed member to take the lead. This man is Alonzo Walton, better known as Spike G. Alonzo grew up on the tough streets of South Side Chicago, specifically the corner of 72nd and Stony. He made a name for himself there as a notorious GD who was known for putting in serious work. Somehow, despite all the chaos around him, Alonzo managed to survive the streets and move to Georgia in '04. Now, most people at 34 would be thinking about leaving the street life behind, but not Alonzo Walton. He stayed true to his Gangster Disciple roots, even in his new home of Atlanta. After proving himself for a few years, the national chairman decided Alonzo was the right man for the job and appointed him as the governor of Georgia. With his new title in hand, Alonzo went on a recruitment spree, pulling in a bunch of new members. By 2008, the GDs were over 50 strong in the metro Atlanta area. The Gangster Disciples had officially arrived. Now, this might sound a bit surprising, but Alonzo and the GDs did not come up with plans to hurt anyone. You're probably rolling your eyes, but hear me out. Most of these members were from Chicago, so they didn't see the Atlanta suburbs as any real threat. Their mission was more about staying low-key and raking in millions with their brothers. For about 3 years, the GDs were running the streets in every illicit way you can imagine. They were swiping credit cards, moving weight, and hitting licks when necessary. Once they made their money, they would bring it back to Alonzo's safe house in South Atlanta. This spot was their hub where members would meet up, discuss business, and lay low when things got too hot. Everything went smoothly for the first few years, no members got arrested, and there were no violent incidents. But as with any story involving gangs, peace didn't last forever. One bad incident would unfortunately kick off a chain of events that changed everything. This brings us to Marietta, Georgia, a suburb about 20 minutes northwest of Atlanta proper. For those who don't know, Marietta is usually a quiet place where not much happens. However, at that time, it was home to 3 particularly grimy gangster disciples. First up, we have 28-year-old Alfonso J. Rock Watkins from Pittsburgh. Then there's 24-year-old Harvey Rux Hogans, a native of Brooklyn, New York. And lastly, 29-year-old Derek Kemp, who was a local of Marietta and a graduate of Florida A&M University. For whatever reason, these 3 decided to join forces as Atlanta Gangster Disciples in their adult lives. In the summer of 2011, this trio decided to make their first big move. Derek, J-Rock, and Rux were off to the races when they met a plug named Derek Gray, a 22-year-old local from Marietta. Derek was your typical suburban plug. He operated solo, stayed low-key, and stacked whatever money he could. Recently married in the spring, this side hustle was his way to collect some extra cash for his pregnant wife. When Derek met the GDs, he saw it as a golden opportunity to level up. So after a few days of texting back and forth, they hatched a plan. Fast forward to July 2nd, 2011, the day of the big deal. At 7 p.m., Derek meets the GDs in an empty parking lot in Smyrna, Georgia. This spot, surrounded by forest, was chosen for its remote nature. When Derek arrives, the GDs tell him to hop in the back of their Ford Taurus with his bags. He's a bit suspicious but goes along with it. Once in the back seat, Rux quickly snatches his bag. Derek realizes he's being robbed and tries to grab it back, but the GDs panic and shoot Derek. Then they drive off with Derek still in the car. They speed down Circle 75 Parkway and tragically Derek is left there. The GDs then race down Highway 285 to get out of Cobb County, heading to Union City. There, they call a fellow member to pick them up, set the car on fire, and drive away. By all accounts, Derek was just a good guy trying to support his wife and unborn child. He just crossed paths with the wrong crowd. This incident marked the first major tragedy caused by the GDs in the Atlanta area. Alonzo Walton, the governor, was far from pleased. The location, the tragic outcome, and the burning car were all too much for him. Concerned about the potential fallout, Alonzo consulted with the national chairman about appointing a chief enforcer for Georgia. With the GDs growing rapidly, he couldn't afford more risky incidents. Members needed to fear making such costly mistakes. The chairman agreed, and Alonzo appointed Donald Glass, aka Smurf, as the chief enforcer for Georgia. Smurf, a local GD from Lithonia, Georgia, had a reputation for being dangerously loyal. Once appointed, he formed his own enforcement crew known as the Hate Committee, whose sole purpose was to discipline out-of-line members. If an Atlanta GD member stepped out of line, Smurf would send the Hate Committee after them. However, Smurf was not the only chief enforcer in Atlanta. Kevin Clayton, aka OG KK, also held the title. KK, a local rapper with deep industry connections, was the go-to guy for rappers visiting Atlanta. Unlike typical extortionists, KK sought mutual respect rather than intimidation. Together, Smurf and KK grew the Hate Committee to over 20 members in the first year, recruiting both existing GDs and non-affiliates who wanted to join. Smurf and KK aimed to make the committee feared in Atlanta. Early on, they were eager for action but had no ops or members to discipline. They were bored and ready for some real work. During the summer of 2012, Kevin Clayton came up with a perfect idea. After hearing Rick Ross's hit song BMF, KK felt disrespected. In the song, Ross says, "I think I'm Big Meech, Larry Hoover whipping work, hallelujah." KK took offense, believing it was inappropriate to use the GD founder Larry Hoover's name without permission from the GDs.
I think I'm Big Meech, Larry Hoover, whipping work.
KK reacted harshly to Rick Ross. On October 29, 2012, he released a video on YouTube threatening Ross and declaring him banned from Georgia.
Public service announcement right here, straight to the point. This straight at Rick Ross, the whole Maybach music is real talk. Pulling up on you, we pressing up on you, the whole Maybach. Music, don't matter who in music. Everybody on your label is in trouble. GD4!
The video from KK went absolutely viral in the hip-hop world, and Rick Ross had no choice but to respond. At that time, Ross happened to be on tour for his new album God Forgives, I Don't. MMG Maybach Music Group was dominating the rap scene, with Meek Mill emerging as a star, Whale becoming a top artist, and French Montana dropping back-to-back hits. This was a massive tour selling out stadiums across the country. Coincidentally, just weeks after KK's video, Rick Ross announced the rest of the MMG tour was canceled. This included tour dates in North Carolina, where the local GDs released a video similar to KK's. As soon as the news broke, everyone assumed Ross was terrified of the GDs, forcing him to respond to the rumors. On December 10, 2012, Rick Ross addressed everything in a radio station interview. He explained why the tour was canceled and insisted it was not because of any threats from the GDs.
The rest of the tour due to the promoter wasn't really handling his business, you know what I'm saying? He canceled a date of mine. I was going to Tucson, Arizona, with some power that I needed to take away from homie, so I canceled the rest of the dates. And never was it due to any threats. You know, I'm a certified man. I am a real boss.
Ross stood his ground, defending his reputation like a man. But what do you think? Did he cancel the tour because of the GDs, or was it just a coincidence? Before you decide, let's dive into the next incident that might shape your opinion. January 27, 2013 was Rick Ross's 37th birthday. He headed out to Brickell, Miami to celebrate. After a joyous night, he drove home in his Rolls Royce with a woman named Shatiria. At 4:42 a.m., while driving through Fort Lauderdale to his beachfront mansion, a car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down and shots were fired at Ross's car. Ross punched the gas, speeding down Las Olas Boulevard. After creating some distance, he made a sharp right onto 15th Avenue, losing control of the Rolls Royce and crashing into a nearby apartment building.
Drive-by shooting on Las Olas, a gunman, police say, aiming at rapper Rick Ross. The 911 calls just released.
Oh my God, they're turning around and coming back. Okay, I'm hanging up.
Callers hiding, Rick Ross trying to get away, ramming his Rolls Royce into a nearby apartment building.
Fortunately, both Rick Ross and Shatiria were okay. However, this was a terrifying incident for the Teflon Don. The Fort Lauderdale police were concerned and approached Ross for details, but he refused to make any statements. The case remains unsolved, leaving everyone to speculate. Was it the Gangster Disciples making a point, local Miami beef, or just a random attack? Given the timing, many online speculated it was the GDs. The rumor gained traction when, in a 2016 testimony, an Atlanta GD named Markel White made some shocking statements. He told the courts that after the incident, Rick Ross agreed to pay the GDs $6 million to get off his trail. However, he clarified that the final payment was $3 million from Rick Ross to the Atlanta GDs. He didn't specify who exactly got the money, but we can imagine who it was.
Mr. White, did you ever learn from any of the Gangster Disciples whether or not anything ever happened as a result of those videos directed at Rick Ross? From my understanding, he ended up paying like $3 million.
Whether or not this is true remains uncertain, as no one else has confirmed it. What is clear is that the Atlanta GDs, particularly the Hate Committee, were becoming increasingly dangerous. From this moment on, they would wreak absolute havoc in the streets of Georgia. Everything started on February 16, 2013. OGKK was feeling like the man in the streets after going viral. On this day, he was shooting a music video in one of Atlanta's most notorious neighborhoods, the Shell Station on Hollowell Parkway, also known as The Bluff. He was there with Smurf and committee members Shantae Craig and Lewis Mobley. While recording the video, a man in a red jacket jumped in front of the camera, taunting the Disciples and repeatedly yelling BLACK, an acronym for Blood Love All the Time. The GDs were not feeling the love. OGKK was furious and looked over at Lewis Mobley to control the situation. Allegedly, Mobley whipped out his gun in front of everyone and shot the man. The victim, Jermaine Higgins, was rushed to Grady Hospital and survived. Jermaine, an alleged Bloods member, had no idea who he was messing with. After the incident, he was furious because he thought it was all supposed to be a joke. In classic Atlanta fashion, he told the police everything that happened. Consequently, hate committee member Lewis Mobley was quickly arrested. In the end, Mobley was sentenced to life in prison. During this period, Atlanta was getting really bad. Incidents like this were happening because people from different gangs across the country were moving to the city all at once. The Gangster Disciples, GDs, had no intentions of starting beef, but now they were fully at war with the Atlanta Bloods. Their main focus, though, was still on stacking money and commanding power. Governor Alonzo Walton was not a fan of beef. He only cared about making money. Specifically, he was an expert in finessing insurance money. Alonzo Walton had a female friend named Mildred Frederick. In December 2013, she called Alonzo and told him she blew up her engine by not putting oil in it. Alonzo volunteered to check out the car and see if he could fix it. When he took a look, he realized the engine was completely burnt out. Alonzo saw this as the perfect opportunity to come up. He instantly told Mildred to lend him the car and follow his instructions. Alonzo allegedly towed the car to a remote location and completely destroyed it. Up in flames it went. He then called Mildred and told her to report the car stolen to Atlanta police. He assured her that within the next month the insurance would pay her money to buy a new one. You might wonder why Alonzo would do this, but it was all part of his plan. According to police, all the insurance money ended up in Alonzo's pockets. So now, Mildred was out of a car and the money to buy a new one. This was how the Atlanta GDs operated. Any opportunity to collect some cash, they were on it. The worst part was that their schemes were intricate and very hard to trace. However, their biggest mistake was wiring all the money to their personal bank accounts. This would eventually get them wrapped up, but we're not quite there yet. In the meantime, the GDs felt untouchable and were doing whatever they wanted. Now let's fast forward to March 2014. OGKK and Smurf were still furious about the incident at the gas station. Even though they handled it, they still felt like no GD should ever be disrespected. In their minds, more needed to be done to send the message. So committee member James Hightower was ordered to go on a mission. But instead of driving around looking for them, he decided to text them on social media instead. Specifically, he slid into the DMs of an alleged Bloods member named Anthony Bowers. Anthony had no idea that James was a GD and figured it was strictly for business. After texting, they decided to meet up the next day for James to purchase some items. On March 22, 2014, Anthony was at home hanging out with his best friend Demetris and his girlfriend Maisha. At 11:15, he got a text from James asking to meet up in College Park to handle business. Anthony instantly got up and told Demetris and Maisha that he'd be back in 30 minutes. The couple asked if they could come with, and he dropped them home afterward. Anthony agreed and the couple went with him. At 11:30, Anthony arrived in College Park and backed into James's driveway. Once James got the text, he exited the abandoned house and walked up to the driver's side window. For whatever reason, Anthony's window wouldn't roll down, so Demetris rolled down his in the back seat. He then noticed that James was clutching a gun and told Anthony to speed off. Anthony hit the gas, but that's when James whipped out his gun and shot. Tragically, Anthony didn't make it and Demetris was paralyzed after surgery. The craziest part is that after doing this, James casually walked to a local park. The park was only a couple of blocks away from the incident and that's where he hung out for the next few hours. Why he did this, no one knows, but Maisha gave the police his exact description. She also told them that he took off on foot, prompting increased patrols in the area. Fulton County sheriffs began patrolling looking for anyone matching the description. At 1 a.m., they discovered James casually sitting on a park bench. James wasn't expecting to see police because as soon as he saw them, he took off on foot. He ran through a nearby apartment complex, throwing his phone and gun into the bushes. He then decided to lay down behind the complex and wait for officers to find him. At 1:20 a.m., police found him, put him in handcuffs, and asked Maisha to identify him. She did, and just like that, James was cooked. The Gangster Disciples and the Bloods were now fully beefing in the streets of Atlanta. Things just got worse and worse with the violence. All this terrible nonsense happened in under 4 years. This just goes to show that Atlanta and its surrounding areas are truly no joke. But on the bright side, the police and district attorneys did their best to put people away for a long time. In this case, pretty much everyone in the indictment got over 15 years in prison. Hopefully, this was the end of the GDs in Atlanta, but you never really know. This whole situation is yet another reminder that this kind of life leads to absolutely nothing but terrible negativity. Nothing good ever comes from this kind of lifestyle. If you haven't learned it by now, then you just don't want to hear it. While Rick Ross is living happily in his giant mansion, these guys are all living in a 6x9 cell. The guys like OGKK and Smurf who used to boss everyone around, well, now those guys are being told when they can eat, when they can sleep, and when they can take a shower.